Welcome to day 10 of the 21 Days of Mindfulness Challenge. I'm your coach, Krista, and today we're going to be talking a little bit more about the ego and how to separate yourself from the negative mind talk. So, the ego, which was really well explained by Dr. Wayne Dyer and also Eckhart Tolle, does a really great job of talking about the ego. It's basically this other self, the person in the head that is talking, right? And we are the observer of the person in the head. So, a really cool trick to this is that you can actually give the ego a name if you want to. You could name it, I don't know, Negative Nancy, right? Or you can name it, your favorite name, just to help yourself to kind of identify the ego as separate from you, the observer. So the ego kind of usually fits into a couple of categories. And if when you start to really listen to what the ego has to say, right? I know my ego loves to be the worrier. The worrier is the one that's always saying, oh, well, what if this happens? Or what if this happens? And always thinking about the worst case scenario, which is really, kind of like that fight or flight natural instinct that we all have, right? Always thinking the worst is going to happen. That's the worrier. Another one is the perfectionist. I know a couple of perfectionist egos in my life, and they are always seeking everything to be perfect. And they're always, afraid to make a mistake. And if they do make a mistake, they have to quickly move on from it, right? And they are holding themselves up to these super high expectations. In a lot of cases, they are just not really realistic for them, right? Nothing is ever perfect enough for Mr. Ego. Another one is the criticizer. So this is the person that's always saying, you suck, you're not good enough, you are this, you are that. And it's always kind of like talking negative self-criticizing talk, right? And then you have the victim. So the victim, those are the egos that are saying it's not your fault. Because of this, you are a victim of this circumstance and you have no power and it's not your fault. You're stuck. It's not your fault, da 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 da, right? So, between those four different types of ego categories, I'm sure that, you may fit into one or a couple of them. Like I said, I generally go for the warrior, but I have been known to hit all of the different ego types myself, right? And the idea is that as we name this ego, you can call it ego, you can call it Nancy or whatever, right? And you see this ego as something separate from yourself, and you're the observer, you can start to understand what they're talking about, right? And that's when you say, okay, my ego that is separate from me is a worrier. My worrier is always saying that, what if this happens? What if that happens? And it kind of puts you into this, I don't want to do anything because I'm worried what's going to happen, right? Or if you are a criticizer, you are constantly talking negative. The ego is talking negative in your head about whatever you're doing. You're not good looking enough. You're not rich enough. You're not this, you're not that, right? And as we learn to observe this ego for what it is, which is outside of who we really are, we're the observer of the ego. We can start to disidentify ourselves with that ego by observing the thoughts that are coming through our heads and the emotions that they're creating. We are able to choose a different path, choose a different thought pattern, pull ourselves back into the present moment. So I know we're kind of talking about the same things in different ways, but this is a big deal for us to understand that we have to understand that the ego is separate from ourselves. We have to train our minds to understand that this separate entity within us has certain thought patterns, has certain ways of acting, right? Depending on everything that compromised you, the way that you grew up, the life circumstances that you went through. All of those things, they influence this ego. But the beautiful part about all of this is that we can choose a different thought pattern. We can ignore the ego. We can observe the ego as if we're looking at the monkey again, right? You're observing it and you're moving past it, saying, I'm not attaching myself to that thought pattern. I am not judging it. I am indifferent to it. Therefore, I can just move on and say, oh, that's, my ego again, talking about all this crazy stuff that it's not really true most of the time, right? And even if it is true, don't attach yourself to it, especially if it is a negative thing, because we can all shift our mind to be from a negative thought pattern to a positive thought pattern. And that's what mindfulness is all about. It's about pulling yourself into that present moment and being aware of your thought patterns and being able to kind of have them pass through like a train. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll talk tomorrow.